Hello and welcome to Flame On. I am Brian. I am your host of the Rainbow Spotlight series where we interview queer and allied creators from all over the place. I am so excited. I am here with the delightful queer writer and storyteller, Mr. Matt Baume. How are you, Matt?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
It is a pleasure. I have been a fan of yours for some time. I think our lives are oddly parallel, which we can get into. But I found out about you more recently when I moved here to Seattle. My boyfriend, who is a writer and very interested in your YouTube series, started sharing stuff. And I was like, I know him. I know his writing. I know his Queens of Adventure. I know your work from other outlets. And I was like, why do I? And then it all clicked. And I'm like, oh my God, this is so awesome. So I appreciate, this opportunity to talk to you. Where to start? I want to know about your history. You are great at sharing other people's stories. Your gift of storytelling and your patience and your outlet for other people's stories is so awesome. But I want to know your story more. I feel like you give it in little bits and dribs and drabs. But talk to me about coming from the Northeast, right? Connecticut, right?
Mm-hmm.
And growing up and deciding I want to be a storyteller. Where is that moment in your journey when you kind of lock that in as a dream?
That's such an interesting question. I don't know. I mean, if I thought about it, I probably could lock in. I could probably find that moment, but it was certainly always a part of my growing up is getting lost in stories and I guess distracting myself from whatever was going on in the world. Before I was even aware of there being a world that I might want to distract myself from, it was just a lot of escape from, just reality into books. For me, it was fiction, and particularly books were a really big part of my life. Screens and media, and maybe this is relevant to the kind of work that I do now, but screens and media were not important to my family or my upbringing. Other than occasionally news and some reruns in the evening and stuff like that, but it was not a park 'em in front of the TV kind of household. So it was books for me. And so, looking back, I'm trying to think of the ones that were important. Series, the Bobbsey twins, the Boxcar Children, and the Hardy Boys. Those were all, the kind of books that I really digested when I was a kid, which is weird because they all predate me. It was not contemporary fiction by any stretch, and stuff like the Babysitter's Club just missed me, which was I think a little bit more pop literature for my age group. But I just really liked getting away from the world and into stories, particularly stories about I think I'm not alone in this. Groups of weird kids on their own having an adventure in the woods, stuff like that. That resonated with me because I grew up near a bit of forest and nature, and during summers, or really year round, but particularly when the weather was nice, I would disappear onto the woods, and my family wouldn't know where I was for a whole day. So that was the kind of childhood that I had, and so the stories about it really resonated with me, and so I just really liked the sense of fantasy and disappearing into imagination that was possible with storytelling. So that's, I think, where it got started.
That's, again, oddly parallel. I think a lot of people in our kind of proclivities, sort of the nerd culture, escapism, all that. My first series was Encyclopedia Brown. I don't know if you ever encountered them, but I loved that mystery, that episodic, very mystery, but kind of straightforward. And then that grew into a love of C.S. Lewis, and then Tolkien, and then all the fantasy books, and then Asimov and Clark. And it just I saw books the same way, where it just sprung me out into these different streams, right? These different genres. But it was definitely escapism. So early on, as you're learning about, culture, and you're absorbing, right? A lot of us just absorbing pop culture. What were some of the early representations for you that you saw in books or also television or movies where you're like, that's me. Oh my gosh, let me borrow a piece of that. Let me borrow a piece of your identity and claim it as my own.
Gosh, that's another good question. For sure, like Encyclopedia Brown was very exciting to me as a kid. I think one of the places that, and this is a little bit later in my childhood, but one of the books that really resonated for me at the time, and I think it reads very differently, like as an adult, at least for me, is The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It was I remember the day I was in the library at school. I don't know why my library had a copy of this book, but they did, fortunately. And I took it out. I think it was a little adult, maybe not adult, but it was not the kind of book I would have expected to find in the 7th grade library. But they had a copy. I took this book out. I was like instantly hooked by it, by how smart it made me feel to be able to understand the very clever writing. Like it's just a super witty book, and like I mean wit with like a capital W. Like it's somebody, the writer, like Douglas Adams, has such a great way with language and with puns and with presenting ideas in ways that are clever. And it made me feel clever for understanding it. So just digested it immediately. I remember riding the bus home and being unable to put this book down. I remember finishing it that night because it's a fast read. It's pretty lightweight. And just being totally amazed and taken by this thing and just like obsessed with it. I had to have my own copy. I don't remember where I found it, but I got my own dog-eared copy of this book at a used bookstore. It must have been. And because it's like one of the older editions. I still have it somewhere, like buried in some boxes. And just adopting that to the point that like I would carry a towel around. That's one of the things in the book.
No,
and I would carry the towel around.
It. I love that so much.
I wrote scripts, like I had plans. I actually shot when I was in high school. I adapted part of the book and filmed. I made a video with my friends, rounded up the kids and made a video of some portions of The Hitchhiker's Guide. And I had these big plans. I had made a screenplay out of the whole novel and had big plans to make an entire movie out of it. That never materialized, but I do have some of it on tape. So
do you really? Oh, what a treasure. I wish I had some of my old like VHS camcorder moments still somewhere. I did find one from high school and it was amazing. So Hitchhiker's Guide is interesting, right? Because it originally was a teleplay. And then it was adapted into the novel, which I blew my mind. Although the first thing I did watch was, so it was an audio play first, then a teleplay. So I watched the teleplay in like probably like late 80s from like Blockbuster, right? And then I saw the books, and yeah, you're right. It's just such a rich world. It's an elevated kind of sci-fi, but with the philosophical elements. Like there's so much to hang on to. I love that you carried a towel around, though. I mean, that is definitely something that, like, I think, like, in my brain, I was like, oh, I gotta have a towel. You have to have a towel. You could be ready. But like, I went to a Christian school. It didn't happen. Like, I didn't carry a towel around. Like, I had enough problems dealing with my identity at that age. Like, add a towel to it. Oof, like people would have,
too much to explain at that point.
So much, right? So what? So you're seeing a little bit of that. You're resonating with that as you're growing older, though, and you're starting to kind of get sort of that like queer understanding of yourself, and you're not like everybody else, but you also know that you have these kind of I like guys. What for pop culture specifically? Like, what did you gravitate towards? What did you grab onto for your inspiration and your identity?
I would say Star Trek was a big part of it. We would watch Next Generation together as a family, and I don't know that there's any one character in particular that I really felt close to. Whereas, like, I had a friend for whom Janeway was just like, she was it. Like, he was obsessed with Janeway. Another young, still forming gay kid, but he knew what he wanted, and it was Janeway. For me, I think it was more the curiosity of the show, and the decency of the characters was something that was really important to me. And the idealism of it, of like it's depicting humanity at its best, like people who are the best they can be, going up against problems and, occasionally being challenged ethically about what it means to be a good person. I think is one of the concerns of Next Generation, or what is morally, ethically right. Because there's an assumption there that all people on the show are good. They're all good, moral, ethical people. But that doesn't mean that answers are always easy. So I found that a really compelling, a really compelling world to be in, particularly with the Worf episodes, which I don't think I appreciated fully at the time, but coming back to them later, I really became interested in Worf as a character out of his culture, with a character who is sort of between cultures and striding between them, back and forth. A really interesting character, and somebody who has to constantly question where his allegiance lies and who his people are. So anyway, so Star Trek Next Generation really resonated with me, and then DS9 and Voyager were okay, but I was starting to move away from it at that point. I would say like a lot of the typical high school nerd stuff. Monty Python was extremely important to me,
of course.
And I'm trying to think of like what else. Definitely, as I started to form a queer identity in high school, I don't think I would have called it a queer identity then, but Priscilla Queen of the Desert was on VH1, and I taped that. And Priscilla Queen of the Desert became a very formative, sort of instruction manual for me of what it means to expect gay community at some point in my future.
Mm-hmm. I felt the same resonance. So Deep Space Nine, all of the things you mentioned, absolutely. I was a Babylon 5 person. So I actually kind of started Next Gen and then shunted off to Babylon 5 world, and then eventually came back through Voyager and all that. But Clue, and so funny because your last Sewers of Paris, which is your podcast that you do, which is so amazing because again, you get these interesting people on to talk about their cultural and sort of historical and just who they are, and it's a lovely time of just learning about these people's stories. And your last guest, and I should have his name handy, but he's a streamer. Urban Bohemian, yes.
Yeah, on Twitch.
It was uncanny. The first, and I remember vividly the discussion about Clue, because Clue was a huge touchstone for me growing up. And starting to see a queer identity in the form of Mr. White, even though there's, not 100% that, but just living in the space where Mr. White is a queer character and in that version or that, in outcome, it just informs so much about me, and learning that and absorbing that. So, I love hearing Priscilla. Priscilla was one of those movies for me in college. I think I'm a little older, and that was like such a touchstone, right? Seeing vivid queer lives on screen was so important. I love your YouTube series because I've learned so much and been reminded so much of pop culture in television specifically, but in other ways. And so when you're exploring like the most recent video about Bewitched, talking about the queer undertones, when you were younger, was that era of television something that you watched in reruns, Nick at Night? Was that something you discovered later? Do you feel like any of that sort of imprinted on you at all?
Oh gosh, yeah, for sure. Like there's, like I said, very little TV in my house, but I think relative to other people, but Nick at Night was something that was certainly not just allowed but appreciated, I would say, by like the family culture that I was raised in. So contemporary shows were looked down upon, and reruns that reminded my parents of that my parents watched in the original airing. There was a much greater I'd say tolerance or warmth for. So we had a routine. The news would come on. There'd be no TV before news. News would come on at 6. The local news would happen. Then the national news would happen at 6:30. Then at 7, I want to say like at 7, depending on like what year of my childhood it was. I think there was Inspector Gadget, then Looney Tunes, or some variation of that. But then at 8, I think it was 8, Nick at Night would start. And so we would just have like a steady diet of Bewitched. Gosh, I'm trying to think of what was on Nick at Night at that time. There's definitely Bewitched. Like that was kind of the centerpiece. I believe Mr. Ed was in there.
Of course. Green Acres.
Green Acres, probably. I think Dobie Gillis was in there to an extent. I don't think Lucy there was Lucy. There wasn't I Love Lucy, but I think it was the Lucy Show. And then I'm trying to remember what other. There was definitely the Munsters was happening at some point in there as well.
Yeah.
Oh, Dick Van Dyke. There's a ton of Dick Van Dyke.
Of course.
So those old classic like 50s, 60s, really, and this was like a little too early, I think, for 70s to be on. In fact, I think it was mostly just the first 2 seasons of Bewitched, because I don't remember seeing any Bewitched in color.
You know, I think I saw some of that on TBS later. Like Nick at Night got my attention, and then TBS like carried it the rest of the way. I do think, to my detriment, I have missed whole seasons and eras of certain shows. Like Vic Van Dyke, like WandaVision is fantastic for reminding me of how much, as are your Queer Culture Cruise videos, because you touch on shows that I was exposed to. But and I knew some of the queer history. Obviously, you get curious and you're like, oh, that's right, Maude, Billy Crystal was gay. I mean, you know, like that kind of thing. But like, you do such a good job in your YouTube channel of deep diving into those shows, really explicitly showing the queer influence and outright queer storylines, and then linking them to contemporary events, which I think a lot of people, especially those maybe younger than us who didn't have that growing up and are only discovering it now through either direct sources or reaction videos, right? Didn't know about, didn't have any context for. And so I always tell people, I'm like, oh no, you want to watch these shows. You need to catch up on your queer history.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun to make those. You know, as I was sort of surrounded by old TV culture, it did seep into me. And sometimes like I don't realize it. I don't remember it until I start watching it again. I'm like, oh yeah, that was a big part of, like, I just thought about it a lot. Oh, Get Smart was another one. Like I remember watching a lot of Get Smart.
I love Get Smart. Oh my gosh. It's so funny because Get Smart informed my love of Inspector Gadget. Like one does not exist without the other. And knowing that connection, it just illuminates, and you see this tapestry unfolding. Same thing with Drag Race now. Like you see like the ends of the threads, and then if you walk them back again with something like Queer Culture Cruise or Queer Culture, what is the term now that you're using for your queer culture videos? You
know, it's just my channel. So some of the videos are queer culture, and some of them are it's just Matt Baume talking to the camera. And so basically, the way that it started was I'd made a lot of videos on different topics. Some were more newsy, some were more analysis, some were more of a lecture. And then I also did a few videos about movies with queer content, or movies that reference queer content obliquely with subtext. People enjoyed those, and I enjoyed making them. And so I started making more of them for my YouTube channel. It's been going for a couple years now. I'll take an episode of TV or a movie or something with some historical significance, and I'll just, frame it with some context. Like, here's this great thing that you remember, and here's what was going on at the time, either with the making of that thing or in real life, or here's the history of it. Here's what it turned into. Here's how this happened. And here's why this show mattered to queer people. Here's what it changed. It's a really illuminating process to research these videos. And then, I'll put up, like, they really vary. Some are 10 minutes. I think a few are like a little over 20. And it's such a great feeling to get together with people when a new video goes up, and I usually do a premiere so we can watch it live, and to watch along with people as they're being like, oh yeah, I remember that episode. I remember that moment. I remember that character. I always wondered what happened to that actor. To hang out with other like TV trivia and obscure entertainment nerds with a queer angle is such a fun thing. It's such a it feels like, okay, I found my clan.
I love that you do that. I am such a lurker where I'll sit there and watch it, and then I won't say anything in the chat because I always feel like I'm gonna just say the dumb obvious thing. Like I have this beaten into me from years in the chat rooms of just having myself roundly like embarrassed about something. But it is really a fun community that has grown up around your channel. So I want to put up real quick, and we'll put this up later, but this on the video is the YouTube channel. It's really easy to find, Matt Baume, Baume, for the YouTube. And then do you do the live stream premiere on Twitch, I'm guessing?
It's so I do a little streaming on Twitch and a little streaming on YouTube. So
Oh,
when I
okay,
premiere
both.
the video, I premiere it on YouTube. It's where the video is going to live. So the video that everybody gets like recommended, the algorithm sees, and YouTube likes, that when I flip the switch to go live, we all watch it go live together.
Okay.
And then I also do live streams on YouTube on Saturdays where we just do like research into old shows and go through archives and dig through the history of stuff.
I wanted to ask you about that because I've caught a few of those, and you have this elfish delight of what I remember from college when I would go to the library and sit there with the microfiche and find articles. Like, okay, so this is a dumb story, but did you in your college days go to the microfiche and like dig up old Advocate or Men magazine articles with like nudity? Because that was totally a thing I did.
I love that you did that. What a great resource. It didn't even occur to me that was an option. I was definitely there for microfiche, but it's just kind of phasing out when I really realized what a resource it was.
Oh my God.
I love that for you. It was like a way to find men.
Well, so I was in college in the like mid 90s. I actually, went to college at 95. So I very much coming out at that point, but still, early days, and online was bulletin boards, right? BBSs. And so finding porn on that version of the internet was just not something you did much. You did a little bit. There were used groups, of course, for that. But then, I would find microfiche. And I was interested in also in queer history and culture. So I was reading Advocate because I had heard that was but then they had these like other, like, I forgot how I sprungboard from that to like a Men magazine. And then there's porn. There's porn at the UCF, University of Central Florida Library microfiche. It is there, preserved for the ages.
Yeah. What a gift. Like for me, like, this is going to sound so boring in comparison. I would look up old movie reviews. It's quite tame. I wish I had realized what a resource we had.
It's a different kind of porn though, because like I really enjoy when you're doing your research, and I love that you're streaming your research, because so many people like think research is so isolating and you're just stuck in this world of your own, but you're getting like a taste. People are bringing things to your attention. It's a really collaborative sort of effort, it seems like. When did you kind of stumble or kind of find that was a thing you would want to share as a storyteller?
Yeah, it's funny. Like that was a total accident. So I do a lot of research for the videos and have membership in various archives so I can go and look for things. And I think I'm trying to remember how that came to be. I think, over time, like as I'm looking for stuff, I would find these little snippets and be like, oh, that's kind of funny. I'll just put that aside, or maybe I'll tweet that. And then, people would be like, oh, this is so great. Where did you find it? I'd find like some old review of a movie, or, one of my favorite things is finding reviews of like films that we think of as classic, like untouchably beloved films, like The Wizard of Oz or something like that. And then finding the negative reviews for them when they came out, of people being like, this is garbage. So like one of my favorites is with The Little Mermaid. There were a few reviewers who were just like, boring, this is terrible, Disney's going under. Like, and I just find it so funny to find those reviews of like critics who were just like dead wrong about that. So I think it was something like that. It might have been a Hitchcock film or something I posted a negative review of. It might have been something like somebody reviewed Psycho or something like that with he's really going downhill. Alfred Hitchcock will never recapture his glory. Psycho is one of his worst. Whoops.
Those
that people were like, haha.
Those moments scare me so much as being someone who's asked for like hot takes. And thankfully I don't publish, I don't write as much as I just talk, but like those things, I have the mortal fear of living to eat my own words. And I know it's happened many times over on the podcast. I could personally attest to like the identity and whitewashing of Hollywood issue, and having these conversations with my co-host Oral about just like, oh, well, no, Ghost in the Shell, what's her name? Oh man, Scarjo. She's just trying to bring this movie and living to know that I was so wrong, and just knowing that that's out there and that people heard that like mortal fear. So I love that you're exposing other writers. for there.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
So I love this idea specifically because you kind of worked it into your Sewers of Paris podcast, only in the sense that Sewers of Paris comes from this sort of cultural touchstone. I believe it's Los Angeles, queer bar or gay bar, right? So like, talk to me about what it was like kind of putting the Sewers of Paris podcast together and learning and kind of, diving into that world that pre-existed us and trying to, extract stories of queer culture and the bars in that era and how that turned into like a vehicle for you to tell other people's stories.
Yeah. So it's really funny how that podcast, The Sewers of Paris, came about. It was at the Eagle here in Seattle. I was talking to a friend about, I don't remember how we got on this conversation, but amazingly, it was actually about Bewitched, which I put up a video about today as we're recording this. I just a few hours ago put up a new video about Bewitched. But I was talking to a friend who grew up in Latvia. They didn't have the same kind of reruns that I did, and he had never heard of Bewitched. He was unfamiliar with Endora. So I was trying to describe Agnes Moorehead and this character, this incredible character. It was an amazing speech in the first season of Bewitched. It's episode 2. She has the Quicksilver speech that is just like famous among Bewitched fans, where she's describing the life of the witch, and she has this beautiful monologue. We're Quicksilver. We live in the sound of music and the sparkle of the star. There's no world that cannot be our home. Nothing that is outside of our reach, beyond our reach. Something like that. And it's a gorgeous speech about what a beautiful thing it is to be an outsider, and how tedious it is to be mundane. So I'm describing this to my friend, and then he's describing for me Christopher Isherwood, who I had never read, but Christopher Isherwood was a fantastic writer, wrote I Am a Camera, which was adapted into Cabaret. He did like just a tremendous amount of incredible writing about the gay world of the early half of the 20th century. And so we're having this kind of cultural exchange between the two of us. And I'm like, there needs to be some canon of like, here's all the stuff that, for me, like when I was conceiving of this, that gay men should be able to reference and acknowledge and communicate with to each other, because often, we may have these very different experiences in our lives and very different cultural references, but when we start to describe them to each other, sometimes they capture an experience that is beyond the words that we have to describe our lives. And so that was a very haughty way of saying, a very pretentious way of saying, like, I just want to talk about Bewitched. So I started developing this idea for a podcast where I just have guests on to talk about the entertainment that changed their life. For me, it's very hard for me to pick one thing, but Priscilla is certainly one of the, it's up around the top. For my friend who I was talking to, Christopher Isherwood was important, but it was actually Eurovision that inspired him to want to leave Latvia.
Oh, wow.
For another person, it was Julian and Sandy, who are these two characters who were played on the radio in the UK by two very, very effeminate characters who would speak in Polari, gay slang. It gave this person a sort of another view on how gay people can create association between each other. For a lot of people, it's Oscar Wilde or Madonna. For some people, I like one of my favorites is Jingle All the Way. One person described it's the Arnold Schwarzenegger Sinbad film from the late 90s, which seems it seems so trashy and ridiculous. And he acknowledges as much. But for him, it was a movie that helped him understand and grow closer to his father. And it really changed his relationship with his parent, which was Rocky, after he came out as gay. So I'll just, I talk to these people about, and now it's, it's broadened. I talk to, queer people in general about the entertainment that is important to them. The reason that I named it The Sewers of Paris is such a silly reason. It's two things. One is one of my weird passions, one of my weird hobbies and interests is sewers. I just find literal sewers, the pipes that carry water, I just find them incredibly fascinating. And also, when I lived in Los Angeles, I discovered there was a bar. There used to be a bar, no longer, down the street from where I worked when I was there, called The Sewers of Paris, which I just found such a ridiculous name for a bar. It was called The Sewers of Paris in Hollywood. And it always stuck with me as a hysterical name for a bar. And I was like, you know what? This is going to work as a podcast name. I was talking to my partner about it, and we were like kicking around a whole bunch of ideas. And we realized like, oh, it's actually like, we've got the glittering lights of the city above, the high culture. We've got the low culture down beneath the street, and we're combing, we're diving, spelunking through the ooze and the muck to discover gems hidden away in the sewers. So the name kind of stuck, and that's how it came to be.
I love that it is that, like, you know, hand in the gutter reaching to the stars kind of idea, and then it ties to actual like place in LA that I love finding about old gay bars. I'm in a group from my hometown in West Palm, Florida, and it's all about the gay bars that preceded me. I was not out when I was, you know, in school, so I find out about them later. I'm like, oh my God, the Parrot, and we didn't have an Eagle, but you know, other bars similar, and it was just it's I love finding that out, and as a touchstone where, you know, this conversation like you had with the person from Latvia, like that's happening all the time. So many people are talking and sharing stories with these cultural touchstones, and it's a great way to put it all together. We had a comment here, Matt Broussard. Few podcasts are as smart and funny as Sewers of Paris. My first listen was Dungeons and Drag Queens, and I was instantly hooked. I love that. So Matt's amazing. He's a great artist from up in Vancouver, and we both have a love of pop culture. In fact, before this, we were actually on a stream talking about Twin Peaks and how that it's such a train wreck of fascination. But so yeah, no, I love it. I'm digging your storytelling. You do. So I have to ask you this. I have a whole list of stuff. I'm kind of going off a little bit. With your storytelling techniques, and specifically your audio storytelling, do you have like a first broadcaster or first NPR moment or a first podcaster that you heard and were like, yes, I want to do that? And do you know who that was?
Oh, that's another great question. You know, when it comes to podcasts, I'm trying to think like way back. So I had sort of like an early podcasting career, early podcasting projects, let's say. And then there was a little break. And then later on, I got back into it. I would say when I got back into podcasting more recently, just a couple, maybe like, I don't know, like 5 years ago or so, I think one of my role models there was actually Brian Safi from what was then called Throwing Shade, is now called Attitudes podcast. I loved listening to the chemistry that he has with Aaron Gibson, his co-host. They're just real funny. They talk about the news. They talk about issues. They're improv comedians. They're so funny and professional. And the experience of having a friend in your ear was so lovely to me that really inspired me. Going further back, I'm trying to think of like broadcast inspirations. I would say, if I go way, way back, and I wouldn't say that this is somebody who like I attempt to emulate, but it's somebody who is kind of lodged in my mind as the platonic ideal, is Dan Rather. Because like I said, our family would watch the evening news, and Dan Rather's authority was, as far as I was concerned, as a little 5-6-year-old, just absolute. He was just the absolute authority on like anything that was true. Dan Rather would explain and was unquestionably correct about everything. Now, looking at that, I think that is an incredibly unjournalistic, like, I think he would be horrified to hear that. But to regard anyone as the ultimate authority unquestionably about anything is sort of the antithesis of journalism. But at the time, like, I think what I was observing there, what I was absorbing was trust. That there was someone who seemed so wise and objective that I could, just believe what he said. I think I looked to, and local news too. I think I looked at local newscasters as similarly, like, these are just people who know everything. And that seemed really enviable and dignified to me. I don't think there a lot has happened to journalism since the 1980s that I think the word dignified does not apply to everyone in the space of broadcasting these days, but it is something that I certainly respect for the people who pull it off now.
Yeah, it's so funny because, I've talked a little bit about this, but some of the early broadcasters for me that were so influential and made me want to go down this path is Tom Snyder, who is a very famous talk radio. In fact, I listened to him for years on AM talk radio, but then eventually had TV roles in the 70s and the 90s. And I will be quite frank, Rush Limbaugh was actually a big influence for me. And only in that very early incarnation. And I didn't know better. Again, Christian high school. I was a young little dumb Republican. I didn't know better. But a broadcaster, take apart all of the other nonsense that came out of it. He was an engaging storyteller. He was. And as much as I hate the legacy that he has, there was still that gift of storytelling. And it's just to pull that off and look at that and understand it and be inspired by it is weird. But then obviously, you know, much later, like correcting from that, let's say, you know, Ira Glass, oh gosh, you know, any number of NPR people, right?
Yeah. Oh, same for me. Yeah. I think as a kid, I was really taken by Garrison Keillor. I found him a little difficult to listen to now, but
yeah, well, yeah,
I really enjoyed I think it wasn't exactly the content of the stories themselves quite so much as his delivery, the tone, the knack for weaving a spell, basically. I think another one who was really influential to me, this is certainly not groundbreaking by any stretch, George Lucas. Specifically, I've been thinking about this a lot in the last few days because I'm thinking about the ways that movies start. It's just something that I've been kind of idly kicking around in my head is the different ways that movies begin, and like movies thinking about as broadly as possible, like the entire like cinema. How does movies start? And something that I come back to in my mind a lot is those sort of like bluish cyan, thin fonted letters a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. At the beginning of all those films, with the extra dot, the 4 dots, it used to drive me crazy in my copy editor brain that there were. It says a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. ... But it's so simple. It's such a small phrase, not even a sentence, and I think what I find, like, I actually find it incredibly moving in a way that seems a little ridiculous to me when I just think about it logically, but emotionally, that moment at the start of any Star Wars film, that puts you under its spell. I think that is something that, without really thinking about it, without really realizing it, I think it's something that I really obsessed about, the feeling that provides. On one hand, because that a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away is such a beautiful once upon a time for a more modern genre. And the fact that it is an incomplete sentence, that is just a clause with the ellipses there, invites you, like, I feel myself leaning forward in my seat for the conclusion of that sentence, for the continuation of the sentence. And then the very next thing that happens is the smash of that score and the logo and the crawl. And, obviously, I was not quite old enough to see it, but to see it in theaters, where I love that the original crawl doesn't even have the episode 4 there. It just goes right into, it is a time of civil war, and you are just off to the races. It is such a moving experience because I'm sorry, I'm analyzing this in such great detail here. I hope I'm not like spoiling the magic for people, but not like, it's not even my magic trick. But the effect that it has for me is, it very gently, with those words on the screen, a long time ago, it guides you in so gently and silently, because there's no sound under that, and a slow fade out, that I think when the score hits, it locks you. You're so shell-shocked by the sound that you are locked in your feeling of anticipation and curiosity, and it just carries you through the film. Another thing that I kind of compare it to, and it's very different, but it's from around-ish the same time, and it was similarly important to me, is The Great Muppet Caper. That's another movie that I think has just a pitch-perfect opening. It starts beautifully with Kermit, Fozzie, and Gonzo in a balloon just against a blue sky, and it has this wonderful continuity with the end of the original, the Muppet movie, where the story within the story ends with the rainbow extending over them. So there's sort of like a blue sky motif that we're left on for the sort of the story in the story of the Muppet movie. Anyway, Great Muppet Caper starts with them in a balloon. How did they get there? Who knows? Doesn't matter. We're instantly in a story, and they're talking about the story diegetic, as though they're outside of the story. about how, they're talking about the credits, like, wow, there sure are a lot of opening credits here. Does anybody read these? Well, of course, all these people have families. And then, they essentially they crash down into a city, obvious set, and sing a song about what a great movie you're about to see. And I love the enthusiasm and the just unbridled joy that we're going to make a movie. Like, literally, it's the refrain that they come back to in the song is, "Hey, a movie." It's such, like, their excitement for it is so beautiful, and it's also doing a lot of the same work that the opening crawl of episode 4 does, where it's establishing, what is our setting. It's, well, in addition to a galaxy far, far away, it's a time of civil war, that we've got it's clearly the rebels are the good guys striking from a hidden base. Clearly, the bad guys, the evil empire and their Death Star, a terrible weapon. We've got our characters lined up. We've got our stakes lined up. We've got the suspense of Princess Leia carrying the stolen plans. And then the Muppet movie, similarly, very different tone, super different. But here's our characters. Here's our heroes. Here's our setting. It's the world of the common day, but also a little silly. And he explains, there's a little monologue aside that Kermit does. You see, in this movie, we play crack reporters. And he, like, explains to everybody, to the camera, direct address, in sort of the same way that the crawl, the Star Wars crawl, is a direct address to the camera. Mm-hmm. All right, folks, here's what you're in for. Got it? Let's go. And anyway, I'm really, like, babbling about these things, but they, like, the more I think about them, and I've just been thinking about openings of movies a lot. I just watched the Maltese Falcon. It has a fantastic opening as well.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
But anyway, I just, like, those movies, I think, are really in my, like, to metaphorically in my DNA, my creative DNA.
No, that's I'm glad you're able to deconstruct that. And I love hearing you talk about this, because I've thought, like, I'm a film score nut. Like, John Williams music specifically for Star Wars is so important to me as a musician, as someone who just loves film score, and that silence followed by that score intruding is so critical. And then, like you said, the promise of what is to come that is laid out. And then the way the Muppets, all the Muppet movies have really nice moments like this. But yeah, the Muppet Caper's, like, intro is probably, it's. I need to go back and watch it again. Oh, it's been too long. I think I need to, especially now that the Muppets are on Disney Plus. Like, I gotta get back into the Muppets. I loved nothing more than going to the Henson exhibit when that was touring around.
Oh my God, yeah.
Every chance I get to learn more about Jim Henson's life and work, and meeting people who know his kids, and the puppeteering that's still happening because of his kids and the legacy. It's just, it's giving me chills.
I was very fortunate that I've gotten to work for both of my heroes. I worked for the Jim Henson Company, and I worked at Lucasfilm. And so I was, for the times that I was there, I was, a part of those machines. And it's kind of peculiar that they're now part of Disney, but
Well, so I knew you worked at Lucasfilm, and I was actually going to ask you about that, but I didn't know about Henson. So what did you do at the Henson Company?
I was an intern there many years ago, in 2002 to 2003. No, just 2002. So basically, from the start of 2002, almost for the full year, I started there as an intern, and then I worked in essentially post-production and archive. So wow. I was in development at first as an intern, basically shadowing the people who were working on creating new Muppet properties, or new Henson projects, because they weren't all Muppets. And then I came back after I was an intern, and my job was basically to do traffic direction for tapes as they came in and out of the studio, because this is a pre-digital delivery of stuff. So stuff would be arriving on tapes, and I'd have to make sure that they were destined for the right places. And sometimes that meant pulling stuff out of the archive, which was just a real treat. Opening a box and knowing, like, the last time this box was opened was sometime in the 1970s. And here are, there was this project going on while I was there, of taking the old, very brittle magnetic tape that was about to just crumble into dust. And that tape you had one shot at preserving it. What you could do is run it through a machine, and the machine would read the tape, and the process of reading that tape would cause it to disintegrate. And so you had one shot at reading what was on that very delicate, very old magnetic, I don't think it was celluloid, but whatever material it was on. And then it would never exist again. So I was helping out with the preservation of a lot of the older stuff as well. And even then, like I was 20, 21, 22,
Wow.
had pretty broad knowledge of Henson stuff that has certainly increased since then.
Yeah. Right.
But anyway, so that was my contribution to Henson culture.
I have a Henson deep question I got to ask you. Have you read the Book of Sand or Tale of Sand? Sorry.
Oh, that name's familiar to me, but I don't know what it is.
When the pandemic, since we're neighbors, I have a treat for you that I will have to bring you in person, but it is, Henson did a book, a script, Tale of Sand, that was never made into a movie, but he wanted to. And this is around the time he did, is it Clockworks or
a Timepiece?
Timepiece, yes.
Yeah.
That was the movie or the short film he did that was touring around with the Henson thing. Anyway, Tale of Sand is delightful. It was adapted into a graphic novel probably about 6 or 7 years ago by, oh my gosh, my brain's not working. Ramon Perez. By Archaea Publishing. It is delightful. If you're a Henson, which I think you're a deep Henson fan, you're gonna love this. It is so perfect. I actually have a piece. You can't see it on camera, but I have an original piece from that on my wall because it's beautiful. Anyway, total side quest or side note. So I want to get back to some of your current work because I know you're doing so many cool things. One of the things isn't as current, but I still was really taken by it, which is your book, Defining Marriage, which is still available on Amazon. I don't have a direct link to it, but I will throw up your website because I know you do. Oh, look at that.
There it is. I got a copy right here.
I love it. So if you go to mattbaume.com, you can find a link. It's very easy. It's through Amazon. You can get it as print, audiobook. In fact, that's how I got it because I found out you read it. And I was like, oh, I got to listen to Matt read this. And you did a podcast about it with your partner, James, which it is, again, fascinating parallels because I had a long-term partner for many years and it was pre-marriage and we kept kind of going back and forth on, will they, won't they get married, whatever. And so to hear your very personal journey through that same process with your partner and also set against the history and the fight for marriage and the fact that you worked directly for a nonprofit that was advocating for marriage rights, like all of that, Defining Marriage is a really cool, powerful anecdote / history deep dive. And the fact that you talked to like Dan Savage and Andrew Sullivan, two of my queer icons, like about their respective works in that fight. It is just a delight. And I don't know. I am interested with where we're at now because some of the things you do in that book, there's an interview you have with Catherine. I forgot her last name, but she, I think, worked kind of towards was it the DACA? Not DACA. DOMA. DOMA. And you had a great interview, and she's a lesbian. She came out later. And you came at it very initially with like this, oh, she's a Republican. She fought against my right to marriage. And then you kind of were taken in by her story. With that relationship that you explore in the book with the most recent administration, how do you reconcile like more of that most recent iteration of sort of the Republican Party that we have now and like understanding their stories? Is that something that you have, because you talk about being sort of moved by her story and really understanding it. Do you have that same thought like with the more recent iteration and the people who are out there, kind of fighting against us? Do you have that same idea that if we just heard their stories, we could better understand it? Or I don't know. It seems like it's a lot harder now with the polarization to really have that same kind of open-minded dialogue that you had.
No, is the short answer. The last couple of years in particular have been a time for me to shed some of the sympathy and patience that I've had for people who really I think are acting unethically. I think if you interpret ethics to be a consideration for the impact that your actions have on other people. It's a strange conflict that I do feel when I have to engage with somebody who is simultaneously a nice person to talk to, and who might have experiences that I sympathize with. And, when I hear about somebody's pain or somebody's, struggle or suffering that they've been through, it is difficult not to be like, oh, you poor thing, I feel bad for you. And I think that's a perfectly legitimate thing to feel. And it's difficult to hold, particularly for me, because I want to be everybody's friend, but it's difficult for me to hold in my head the two thoughts of, I have sympathy for the pain that you have felt, and also I am deeply opposed to the immoral actions that I think you have taken, or the immorality of the actions that you have taken. So yeah, particularly now I find it really difficult to have any patience or interest in meeting people in the middle, or extending them the benefit of the doubt. Given what the last few years have been like, I think if anybody is still clinging to what the party has been under the last few years of leadership, I don't know, like as the internet saying goes, I don't know how to explain to you that you should care about other people. But that having been said, it's not like the Republican Party suddenly turned bad 4 years ago. They've been bad. This isn't a new, this is something that predates my life. This is before I was even born. They were bad. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, on one hand, I think I do find it very beguiling to think, oh, we have things in common, and that means we can be friends. And I think that the last few years have really shaken that out of me, and made me prioritize sympathy for people who are more worthy of friendship and partnership.
Yeah, and I feel the same way. I mean, again, growing up as a Republican, doing all the stuff, it's been a journey for me, and I still have conservative friends, where I work and in certain parts of my life, but it's become a lot harder for me to keep those friendships close, especially, in the last few years, with the struggle and with just all of the worst fears coming true. It's just impossible. But like you, I like to be everybody's friend. I have that empathy gene, on overdrive, right? And I want to understand them, but I also just go, there's just some divide here. We can't bridge. Like there's just a fundamental difference of respect, and this sense that like their priorities have to, pardon the phrase, trump others. It's like, no, it's not. It doesn't have to be that way. You can just live and let live, and you go off and go off in your own direction, and don't. Yeah. So same page, 100%. And it was interesting hearing that story in your book, Defining Marriage. Just having that moment in this context now is just so much harder, to be sure. I do want to also talk about, speaking of Seattle and speaking of, I don't know, the sort of the current events, if you will. I want to congratulate you. You got a GLAAD nomination for Outstanding Journalism for an article about, it's for a series about, queer spaces, and specifically here in Seattle, a queer space that was having to shutter because of the pandemic. And I actually so I moved here about a year ago, and it's been a weird year, right? But like one of the things I was so excited about was getting out into Seattle and getting the queer history and culture that I knew was here so richly. And then, of course, have not been able to. But the bacon strip sounds amazing.
Yeah. It's sort of a burlesque drag comedy show with meat, with boys in their underwear running around serving you actual bacon from a tray. I do miss that. I miss that culture. Boy, I think everybody misses just going to things.
Yeah. Right.
And it is a bummer. Like I'm glad that I had the opportunity, and still do. Like I write for The Stranger and write a lot about the stuff that makes Seattle such a magic city, because I love it here. And I think the hibernation that we're experiencing now will not last forever. And when it's ready to go away, there's so much fun that we're going to start having again.
I am so excited to get to. I was telling my boyfriend that we were driving into the city for something very quick, like we were getting vegan donuts or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, gosh, can you imagine? Like the last thing we got to do when we moved here, we got to go see Tammy Brown at Queer Cremworks.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like, I mean, I had been to the Eagle, I'd been to the Pony, I'd been to a few places, but like that was to me like the coolest, like fun, even though the show was a hot mess. But getting to see some of the local drag queens perform that open for like just that moment felt so good. And then the shutdown. So I am so excited for when that opens back up. I am so excited about learning more. I actually talked to your friend and fellow Queen of Adventure slash Queen of Adventure is the new title for your D&D drag series, which is a great concept, and I'm looking forward to it. Hopefully coming back, post pandemic. London Bradshaw was our last guest. And I love her. We've been following her work on Stream Queens. They had a great convention this past weekend, Reclaiming Your Time, which was outstanding, great POC content. But yeah, I'm excited for all of the future soon, whenever we get all our vaccines. But in the meantime, though, you are doing a really cool thing on Twitch. I want to make sure I mention this, being on Twitch ourselves, that is exploring. I mean, you do your deep dives, you do your gaming. But this month is all about adventure games, right?
Yeah. So I started doing Twitch streams back in November, and just as another way to spend time with people, because we're all going a little cabin sick, I guess. So I just wanted to spend more time with folks. I'm really enjoying doing the live streams on YouTube and streaming games and just chatting and hanging out with people. And it really varies. Like some days we'll just talk for like 3 hours. I'll talk to people. But we'll also share our love of culture. Sometimes we had a stream the other day where we just watched old 80s cartoons opening theme songs. That was a lot of fun. So people would like, oh, remember this show? Remember this show? Remember this show? And we'd just like, some people would be like, I've never heard of that. What is that? And so we'd critique the opening theme songs. Anyway, so something that I'm doing for March is a very loose theme, but for March, I am streaming old classic adventure games. So I just started playing Sam and Max Hit the Road. I've also got all the Space Quest and King's Quest games in the wings. I might do a Gabriel Knight. I really like the Gabriel Knight games.
Gabriel Knight and Laura Bow, A Colonel's Bequest. Beautiful.
I haven't. I played Gabriel Knight 1 and 2 and attempted 3, which was more trouble than it was worth. Yeah. But I've never played the Laura Bow series, so I'm really looking forward to getting into that. I started 1. I think I started Dagger of Amun-Ra, but didn't get far. So I'm looking forward to like getting going and finally experiencing that 30 years later.
I think that it's so fun, and I've been doing like dumb Fortnite and Final Fantasy Twitch streaming myself, but it is so much fun to go back to that era for nostalgia, of course, but for sort of interesting storytelling choices and sort of seeing what worked and what didn't, and with the technological constraints as like a factor. There's a lot of joy there, and Space Quest is one of my favorite series. So I am super excited for that. We're about out of time, but Matt, I want to thank you so much for being like a queer storyteller, like inspiration, and even though we're sort of contemporaries, I think you have excelled and done some amazing work, and you're all over. You have so much content that it is truly a delight to spend time and just like understand a bit about where that content came from and how you brought all this to the world. So I thank you again for all of your great work. It's I know you probably get a good feedback, but I do think that it's really important. I want all of our fans and all our listeners and viewers to go to mattbaume.com, check out your YouTube, subscribe, of course, get the notifications, all that jazz, right? And then go to your Twitch stream, because again, was it Monday, Wednesday, Friday? I think from 5 Pacific to 9. Is that about right?
That's correct. Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 5 to 9-ish.
And it's a lot of fun. I'll try to be a little bit more of a regular on there.
Oh, good.
It's really cool to get to share in that community. So again, thank you so much for your time, Matt. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It was great to talk to you.
Excellent. All right. Well, take care.
Thanks. You too.